Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to revisit a tier list that, well, we haven't really updated in a long time. And this tier list is going to be focused on one thing in particular, and that is sequence nodes. We will be looking at every single S2 that is currently available in the game and doing a tier list of their overall value. And the reason for that is quite simple. You might be asking, why are you only going to S2? Why aren't you doing S1? Why is this specific number? And the reason for that is because of this. You can buy dupes in the Coral Shop. And one thing is very clear. Wuthering Waves reruns its characters very, very, very frequently. Ciaconna, for example, was a unit that ran in version 2.3, and now she's running again in version 2.6. Lupa ran in version 2.4, and she's going to release in 2.7, right? Or rerun in 2.7. It's clear that Wuthering Waves takes these units and reruns them about once every 3 to 4 updates. Cartethyia probably should be in 2.8. And so I think this is a good time for us to take a look at overall value to see how these characters progress with these dupes, because chances are you might have a lot of coral like me because you save up this resource because, well, being able to directly pull dupes from the shop is kind of nice. So without further ado, we're going to get right on into it and just start breaking down all of the units. But the thing is, when it comes to this unit order, we're going to be taking a bit of a different approach. We're actually going to be going backwards. Yes, we're not going to be starting from good old Jiyan, Yinlin, and then kind of going from there. We're actually going to start off with Iuno, Augusta, and then kind of go in reverse order, just to spice things up for a little bit. So without further ado, let's go ahead. Let's get right on into it. The first unit up that we're going to be taking a look at right now is, of course, going to be Augusta. And when we're examining a character's S2, we're naturally going to factor in the impact from their S1 as well, because you cannot get an S2 without first having your S1. So Augusta's S1 is, if you haven't taken a look at it yet, it is kind of loaded. So the first impact, or the first effect of this sequence node is that it gives her Crown of Wills buff that she has at the start of battle, and after her teammate, the recipient of her outro skill, uses an outro, she gets it. Each stack of this increases her critical damage by 15%. And she gets a max stack of 2 on it now, up from 1. And using her intro skill is also going to give her a stack as well. This effectively is, as an S1, just 30% critical damage. That is roughly what it is from a damage perspective, because you should pretty much always have 2 stacks of Crown of Wills playing Augusta in her typical rotations. It also is going to give her another 15% electro damage, because each stack of Crown of Wills actually gives you electro damage bonus, and it increases the number of stacks by 1. It's also going to give her interruption resistance on all of her Undying Light, her enhanced resonant skill attack chains, but this isn't really, she basically is almost uninterruptible anyways, because I didn't even know she could be interrupted during this attack chain. It's nice flavor, but I don't think it really does that much in combat. That, again, most of the bonuses here. Now, when it comes to her S2, Augusta is going to have her Crown of Wills buff updated even more. Each stack is going to increase her crit rate by 20%. And remember, her S1 gives her 2. So, this essentially is, Crown of Wills is now going to give 40% crit rate, 30% critical damage, and 30% electro damage. But that's not it. There's more. For every 1% of crit rate over 100%, Augusta gains 2% critical damage up to 100. So, critical rate and critical damage in this game are literally at a 1-to-2 ratio for pretty much every single thing in the game. You can just kind of take a look at it over here, right? This weapon, Jinhsi's weapon, has 24.3% crit rate, and the crit damage alternative has 48.6. So she's essentially getting the same exact conversion that you would get from anything else in the game. And so you can go up to 50% overcapped crit rate, and then have it directly convert into critical damage. This means that if you're somebody, right, who has a really... Okay, my Augusta's build is... So if you have an Augusta like mine, who has an exceptional amount of crit rate, right, because her you're using a crit rate forecast, and her weapon doesn't really give that much, then this S2 is basically going to add that 40% crit rate on top of it, and then convert the additional 30% to, like, 200... Go all the way up to maybe, like, 280% critical damage with 100% crit rate. And the end result of that is that, well, this character is exceptionally strong. However, it does come at a bit of a cost, right? This is all just damage that's being applied to crit and crit damage. There's not a lot of stuff that happens with her multipliers over here. And a lot of other characters in the game have S2s that will, like, buff the amount of damage that, like, literally their skills do versus straight up buffing their stats. And so it makes her build a lot easier, but I do believe, like, the ceiling of her S2 might not necessarily be as high as other units. But at the end of the day, right, this is going to have result in her having some of the craziest stats ever. And I will say it's strong, but I'm not going to call it one of the most powerful S2s in the game. I feel like there are other S2s that can really change the game a lot more, specifically for the DPS units. But once again, their changes don't really show up in the stat menu, but hers will. So I'll just say overall, like, as a rating for this one, the value of her S2 for her isn't on par with other characters. I think that she scales, actually. So this is kind of like the trade back, or this is the trade-off for Augusta. Her S2 doesn't scale as well as other units, but she has, well, you can see her S6, and this will explain why her S2 doesn't feel as strong. Because her S6 gives her an additional buff on top of the previous Crown of Will's buffs. That's what her S6 does, right? And so it gives her even more conversion and basically builds off of her S2. And then her S2 is contributing to the S6. So I think it's like a balancing lever to make sure her S6 isn't insane. But that's why we're not gonna be rating it as high relative to some of the other DPS ones. Just from an honesty perspective, because it's more of like a stepping stone to S6. But when Augusta does get there, she's pretty strong. But once again, you can't get S6 free with your corals. So we won't be doing too much coverage of it over here. So yeah, that's where it's going to go. In the middle of A, it's probably not going to be the top of A. Iuno over here is going to be a bit of a situation. I have strong opinions about this S2. To get there, let's start with her S1. When Iuno's in the lunar cycle, her attack is increased by 40%. Neat. When Iuno is inside the full moon domain that she creates with a heavy attack at the end of her rotation, she restores 1 point of energy per second. So basically her S1 is less ER cost required, an attack boost to 40% during her rotation. And then, of course, right, she gains some interruption resistance on some abilities. It's actually a pretty nice S1. I would say it's a pretty loaded S1, to be honest. A lot of characters only get ER, but she gets an attack boost, a significant one, and ER as well. It's quite nice. However, when we get to her S2, this is where stuff gets a little bit interesting. So this is the unfortunate part about this S2. It only works with this Blessing of Wand Light mechanic that can only trigger if you're Iuno or you're Augusta. And so this is 40% additional damage amp to Augusta and herself. And naturally, if Augusta's not on the team, this isn't going to work. So it's mainly a 40% damage amp to herself, if that's the case. And the problem with this sequence node, in my opinion, is the fact that amp is going to get oversaturated regardless of what you're doing. So there's a big difference, right, between having 0% damage amplification and 40%. There's not as much of a difference between having 90% damage amplification and 130, because that's what Augusta's going to have. Augusta's going to have 90% damage amp from Iuno's baseline Blessing of Wand Light, which gives 40%, and then she's also going to have the 50% from her outro skill. You're essentially, if you're getting this for Augusta, going from 90% amp to 130, which is honestly not that much of an increase. And for Iuno, you're going to be going from 40% amp to 80, which can be decent, right? 40% to 80 can be decent. She gets her own 10 stacks of Blessing of Wand Light going throughout her rotation. But the thing is, what if you're using Iuno as a main DPS? Well, then, if she's getting something like let's just be honest here, a Jiyan outro skill, which gives 38% amp, well, now you're going from 78 to 118, which isn't that great, right? And so the end result is that, like, the main benefit to this is when Iuno doesn't have an amplifying outro skill. Because if you're already using this for Augusta, Augusta already has a shit ton of amp, so 40% more doesn't really do that much. And if you're using Iuno as a main DPS with an outro buffer, it's not doing that much. And so the only real teams where this feels like it's significant is when you're running like Iuno, Ciaconna, Shorekeeper, not with Arrow Rover because Arrow Rover's got their own amp. And then maybe you're running like Iuno with the Augusta team, but then Iuno's doubling her amp. But then Augusta's not gaining as much of a bonus. Because, again, it's relative to the prior bonuses you already have. So to me, this one is kind of just... I think it's a stepping stone to Iuno's other nodes, where she, gets huge multiplier increases like 1,600% on her S6. I think this S2 actually kind of sucks, bro. I'm going to be honest. I think more and more about its use cases. It feels like it's diluting. It's a saturated amplification stat that if you're using it for Augusta, once again, it's not improving it by that much percentage-wise. And it really only works on one of Iuno's teams, the one with Ciaconna. It's got niche use cases, but I really don't think it's... I think if you already have these two, you don't need the extra damage at all in that team anyways. So it's just... It feels relatively pointless unless you're going all the way to S6. That's just my take. The next unit that we've got in store for ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Phrolova. And I'm not going to lie, I kind of don't remember her nodes, but we will get there. All right, first one is... She gains increased damage multipliers, and this is what I was talking about when it came to the other units. She gains increased damage multipliers, and then also shortens her rotation. This is an incredibly good S1. It's actually nuts. Because one of the downsides of Phrolova is that her damage is backloaded into this Scarlet Coda attack. And she has to build up 6 nodes to use this massive Scarlet Coda attack. And the thing is, if you have a sequence node in S1 that literally shortens the rotation time and gets her doing that big attack faster, that's pretty good. Because it fills out 2 of her 6 nodes, when she starts usually at 0. So it's literally cutting it in a third, basically. Her second one, and then she gets damage multiplier increases. This is an amazing S1, by the way. It's one of the best S1s in the game. Now let's take a look at her S2. The damage multiplier of Scarlet Coda is increased by 75%. Aftersound now additionally increases the damage multiplier of Scarlet Coda by 75%. Casting Scarlet Coda grants 14... So, let's just read what Aftersound does. It has a max of 24 stacks. This gives 14 stacks. Each stack of Aftersound, it doesn't list out the mechanics over here. Each stack of Aftersound increases her critical damage. So, basically, her S2 greatly improves her Aftersound buildup, gives her more and more critical damage, and then also increases the damage multiplier of this ability. It almost doubles this increase from Aftersound. The end result is that this S2 combined with her S1 it might be the strongest S2 in the game. It might potentially actually be the strongest S2 in the game. She ramps up faster. She gains almost an unlimited number of stacks on her ramp up. And it's just like the damage increase relatively is just insane compared to an S0 unit. So it's just DPS-wise, I think this is at the top. I think this is literally at the top. And it's, I'm going to be frankly honest, quite overtuned. So if you are looking for a character that's just going to bulldoze the content, next time Phrolova reruns and you get her S2, you'll basically just win the game. I think she was incredibly overtuned, to be honest. Probably does deserve nerfs if we're being real here. And you'll see why later on. Next unit that we have up is going to be Lupa. Lupa has what I would consider to be very sub-DPS-oriented sequence nodes. Her first one is going to be focused on giving her additional concerto energy and a boost to her crit rate. This sucks, because it's just not really that great of a bundle of stats. I know 20% crit rate is like pretty neat, and having... The thing is, Lupa doesn't even need this concerto in her rotation. You can just use her skill at the start, and then you'll just be fine with everything else that she does. And her 20% crit rate increase is, like, nice, but it kind of just makes your builds easier, and I guess your average damage will go up, but it's just... She doesn't deal that much damage in the first place, so it kind of feels a little bit unnecessary. But... we can talk about that a little bit more. She'll also gain interruption resistance while using her special enhanced skill. But I'm not going to lie, her special enhanced skill already freezes the enemy. So I don't even know... I've never even got it interrupted using this. A single time in my life. I've never got it interrupted using this. So I feel like this line doesn't even need to be there, because I feel like in practice it doesn't do anything. Her S2, though, on the other hand, well, this is what I'm talking about for sub DPS sequence notes. Performing any of her heavy attacks or her mid-air attacks is going to give her a 20% fusion damage bonus to the entire team for 30 seconds. Stacks up to 2 times. It's 40% fusion damage at an S2. If you're looking for something that's going to make your fusion teams better, sure, that's okay. But I'm not going to go out here and say that this is the best S2 or that it's even like an S2 that's worth pulling. I think 40% fusion damage is nice, but it's like, do you need it? No, the fusion team does not need it. And so it just feels like if you want the damage of the team to go up, just go pull sequence nodes for like Brant or something. And honestly, if you're trying to buff the team, her weapon is a way better investment. And if you're at the point where you have her and her weapon, you don't need her sequence nodes for this team to pop off on the fusion side with Brant and Changli. So I'm kind of just in the boat of putting this into like either B or C because it's so unnecessary. It's so unnecessary, and it's only if you're gonna giga min-max for like an additional like 10% damage on the team. It's not something that changes anything at all. And don't worry, I'll be putting a lot of sub DPS sequence nodes down here because I really think, again, for an S2 for corals that you could be spending on other units, I look at the relative value of like Phrolova's S2. We saw all those multiplier increases on all of that. And then down here we have 40% fusion damage bonus. It is what it is. However, there is a nice little thing at S3 where she basically gets all of her attribute requirements removed at S3. And so if you're thinking about S2 as like a stepping stone, this does add a little bit of spice to her kit and let her, have a little bit more freedom in teams. So maybe we'll give it a B because of that. But once again, I'm only going to put it in because you're one step closer to S3. Now let's move on to Cartethyia, everyone's favorite sentinel. And I feel like it's so goofy that she has this hand puppet over here. All right, I hate Cartethyia sequence notes because the first one is a fucking essay. So the first one is she gains this buff called Zeal. I don't even want to read this. So essentially, when she has the Zeal state and she kills an enemy, she'll spread arrow erosion from the target with the most amount of stacks to all the other units next to her. And it has like a 1-second cooldown. It's really only usable in WuWa. That's why there's so much other stuff in here. When Flirtery's Conviction hits 30, 60, 90, this is her Forte circuit, she's going to gain critical damage up to 4 stacks. So 100% critical damage. And then her ultimate, the last hit of it, is going to, go ahead and have that critical damage bonus of 100%. This gives her a pretty decent nuke and does give her ramping damage while she's in the fleur-de-lis state. But unfortunately, it's mainly the last hit that receives most of the buffs. It's a great S1 though, for sure. It boosts her damage a lot, but once again, if you're mainly playing in small Tithia mode, it doesn't do that much. Now her S2. This is where stuff gets a little bit interesting. Casting her Resonance Liberation is going to increase the max stack limit of arrow erosion on targets by 3. This is Arrow Rover's outro skill, and one of the main reasons why Arrow Rover is used on the Ciaconna Cartethyia team. Because arrow erosion, Cartethyia depletes those stacks. And the higher amount of stacks you have, the more that one stack depletion actually does. And so she essentially becomes independent of Arrow Rover completely to deal her max damage than before. However, this can stack with Arrow Rover's outro skill and make the max number of stacks on enemies actually 9. So that's something to think about as well. So, yeah, the next attack after she uses her Liberation is going to directly damage the targets and inflict 3 stacks of arrow erosion immediately. So it's also going to loosen some of the requirements of maybe having like a Ciaconna on her team and stuff like that. Or you can just still run arrow over Ciaconna and just ramp up the stacks like crazy. It also will detonate a stack of erosion as well. Next, after that, if that wasn't enough, the damage multiplier of regular Cartethia's basic, heavy, dodge counter, and intro skill are going to be increased by 50%. And then her mid-air attack, her plunge, is going to be increased by 200%. So as you can see over here, this is kind of an interesting S2. It greatly buffs her small damage form and then greatly increases her self-sufficiency in arrow erosion application when in big form. And the thing is, Cartethia's S2, I would dare say, doesn't feel actually that crazy in the traditional arrow erosion team. It really makes her base form feel really strong, but you don't spend a lot of time in her base form when she's playing with the team. The bonus of pulling Cartethia's S2 is that she's without a doubt the best, like, solo DPS in the game. Because her base form ends up dealing so much damage, and then she can just stack up her stuff pretty much infinitely. So, yeah. I would say her S2 is like, if you're really looking for solo gameplay, great. If you're not, however, and you're kind of just like running her with Arrow Rover and Ciaconna already, and that's the team that you really like, I don't think it's actually going to do a lot for you. If I'm frankly being honest. It's like, yeah, this is like a WuWa thing, and you get one big nuke, but it's like, you don't spend a lot of time in base form in the teams. Her S3 is where stuff gets a little bit crazy. And she starts applying arrow erosion on all of her attacks and then gets a big nuke on her liberation. This is kind of like the real prize when it comes to Cartethia's kit. It's, you kind of don't think about her S1 or S2 that much. You focus on her S3. Because this is when you remove her reliance on Ciaconna completely, and then she is, without a doubt, the best solo unit in the game. So, that's why you see a lot of solo Cartethyia Claires. They won't tell you that they have her at S3, because she trivializes the game as a solo unit when you have her at S3, because, well, every restriction in her kit gets lifted, and she just, well, destroys all the content without any teammates at all. So, if I were to factor it in with just the S2, I would say, I would rate it like this. If you want to use her as a solo unit, it's an S. However, if you're still playing her in a team, I'd probably bump it down to like A. That's my take. If you like soloing with her, S. If you like playing her in a team, it's like A. I'll put her above Augusta, though. I'll also factor in over here that you're one step closer to S3, but I don't think her S2 alone is like giga cracked, and you're gonna like do some crazy shit. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Ciaconna's S1 and S2. And you'll notice that I can actually redeem the first one. I'm not going to, though. Alright, so the first one is, casting a resonance skill is going to go ahead and grant Ciaconna interruption to immunity for 3 seconds, and then also, upon using a basic attack, increase her attack by 35%. Nice little personal damage boost and quality of life boost over here. Nothing too crazy to talk about. Second one, during her resonance liberation, you know where she's saying some shit, resonators in the team are going to gain a 40% arrow damage bonus. The reason why I'm only saying it's okay is pretty simple. Ciaconna already grants arrow damage bonus in her baseline kit. It essentially takes her 24% and then bumps it up to 64% after using her liberation. However, she also used the Gusts of Welkin set, which gives another 15%. So in reality, her actual in-combat contribution of arrow damage goes from 39% to, well, 79%. And it's like a doubling of her arrow damage bonus. But I'm going to be real. You're also probably going to have, with the people that you're using her with, right? Especially a Iuno or a Jiyan, potentially. They're probably already running arrow damage 3 costs. So the situation is that this S2 is really mainly impactful if you're willing to adjust your Echo lineup to run like an attack 3 cost on like your Jiyan or your Iuno, or when you're using it with Cartethyia. Otherwise, you kind of do get oversaturated on the arrow damage bonus. I will basically just be putting it in the same exact slot as Lupa's. I think it's a good damage boost for the team. It's a good personal damage boost as well. But if you already have the teams that would use it well, you don't really feel that much of an impact from it, to be honest. Like, again, if you're looking to improve the damage of the team by pulling this, it's always probably going to be better to just pull the sequence nodes for the character instead, and that will result in a way bigger damage boost for the team. I'm just being entirely real with you over here. And even in like the mono element lineups, it's still probably going to be a better investment to go for like the singular DPS's S2s instead. We'll also take a look at some of the future ones that come up. Unfortunately, Ciacconna's S3 is not really that great because her rotation's already fast. It's not at all like Lupa's S3. And she does gain just like more personal damage boost later on. So it's, you know, that's why I'm rating it below Lupa's, because it's her other sequence nodes aren't really that much better. Now let's take a look at Zani's. I will be judging Zani's sequence nodes based on her character, not her value as a character. So we'll take that approach because pull value-wise, Zani's an F. But we'll make sure to judge her sequence nodes fairly. All right, first one. When the alarm clock rings. This S1 is really good. So the first one basically gives her a 50% spectral damage bonus after using one of her enhanced skills. This is incredibly strong. She also gains interruption resistance during the most damaging part of her rotation, which is really strong. Her S1 is insane. Her S1 is actually insane. I'm going to be honest. It's actually ridiculous. So you remember how I just said Ciaconna was like 40% arrow damage? This is just 50% to herself on S1. S2 is gain an increase of crit rate by 20%. And then the damage multiplier of targeted action and forcible riposte is increased by 80. I think her S1's actually better than her S2. I'm not even joking. I think Zani's S1 is actually better than her S2. Because it's like, this attack doesn't even do that much damage in the first place. Right? She's gaining an 80% damage increase. Or 80% multiplier increase on an attack that doesn't deal that much damage. That's the unfortunate part about this one, right? And the thing is that all you're really getting is like a minor damage boost and then 20% crit rate. But the thing is that like Zani's build will oftentimes just have a lot of crit rate because you'll run her with like Shorekeeper. And also, I'm missing a crit rate roll in this build, right? I'm pretty sure I am. Actually, no, I have all of them, right? If I have Shorekeeper and then the Spectral Frazzle set active, I will be at 84% crit rate. So I would actually be overcapping with her S2 on a full build. I would have like 6% extra. So it kind of doesn't feel that good, if I'm frankly being honest. I don't think it feels that great. I think her S1 is fantastic, though. And I think that, I mean, yeah, maybe it's a... I don't know. I don't think her S2 is that good, because it's like, you don't really even need the crit rate that much at like a max build. Her S1 is nice, though. That's a great damage bonus. And people are saying 50% spectral damage is oversaturated. That's not true. Because she uses the Eternal Radiance set, and the Eternal Radiance set gives a very low amount of spectral damage. It only gives you, literally, 25%. So her S1 is fantastic because it offsets the lower spectral damage bonus on the Eternal Radiance set that she's using. So, yeah, her S1 is fantastic. I would just say, overall, I'll rate her S1 and her S2 at, like, a similar level. She's gonna be an A, carried by her S1. Her S2 is pretty dog shit in my opinion, but her S1 is broken. Very similar, actually, to another spectral character on the roster. Cantarella over here, her S1 is going to be pretty simple. Casting a Resonant skill is going to recover 1 point of trance. This essentially helps her deal more damage and then also speed up her rotation a little bit. She also gains interruption resistance while using the most damaging boost in her kit. This is a lot of damage boost over here. This is one of the better S1s in the game. However, it is fair to say that Cantarella's damage output at S0 is not that great. And so her S1 having all these massive amount of multiplier upgrades, it kind of just makes her deal similar damage to a main DPS. Then her S2, she's basically going to have more uptime on this Hazy Dream effect. And when an enemy has Hazy Dream on it, it's essentially going to move super slow like it's CC'd. And then also she's going to deal this damage of Jolt if she wakes them up. And the thing is, Cantarella's S2 makes her Jolt damage, it increases by 245%. And the reason why this is significant is because, well, when it comes to, like, Jolt, the damage multiplier on it at a baseline is decent. But multiplying this by 245%, let me just look at what it is at level 10, that's essentially going to be close to around 500% damage every time she wakes up an enemy from the Hazy Dream. And she can do it once over here. She can also do it, well, once over here. I think she could do it 2 times over here, actually. Wait, it's once over here. It's once over here. I think she can trigger Hazy Dream maybe like 3 or 4 times in a rotation. It increases the number of times that she can basically trigger the Hazy Dream, and then the pop of the Jolt. She increases that by 1, and then the Jolt pops end up dealing way more damage. This essentially converts her into like a full main DPS in terms of like her potential. And unfortunately, if that's not what you want from a sub DPS character, then you're going to be really disappointed. However, from an overall strength perspective, I can't really call it that good. And this is the reason why I'm not going to call it that great. This basically converts her into Camellya that heals. And if you want to get a unit, 3 copies of a unit, to turn her into a Camellya that just heals, you paid like 3 units for the price of 1 to get like this interesting mechanic where you can deal a lot of basic attack damage and heal people. I think like as an overall strength-wise and as an add to your account, it's not a lot. I'm just going to be real here. I don't think it adds a particularly large amount to your account to convert a sub DPS to a main DPS. And yes, you'll retain her buffing ability, you'll retain her healing ability, but at that point, you're sort of just like, the damage increase relatively is like nice, but it's like her S0 state is a lot weaker than, you know, other sub DPSs on the roster as well. So I dare say it almost feels like her S2 is similar to like Brant's S0. That's the unfortunate truth of the matter when it comes to at least my opinion on her gameplay. It really does feel like her S2 makes her like similar to an S0 Brant. And when that's kind of what's going on, it's like, I don't know. It's like, if you really want to make your Phrolova team stronger, you could go for it. But at that point, you would just pull Phrolova's S2 and then get like 7,000 times more value out of her. And again, this is just my personal take, but going from S0R1, pure sub DPS, to viable as a main DPS at S2 is like, you could have just pulled 2 extra characters. You could have just pulled 2 main DPSs instead. Or you could have pulled sequence nodes to like turn a main DPS into a super main DPS. But she just becomes like a multi-rolled character. But isn't like exceptionally amazing in any of the roles that she's doing either. Just becomes like a jack of all trades at S2. Which is, it's okay, I guess, but I don't really see a huge amount of value in it. Now, on the other hand, well, we're going to have to talk about another character that, well, they scale a lot better with sequence nodes. And that's going to be Captino Branto. So, the first sequence node that this guy has is A, it gives him a CC in his kit, where Return from Ashes, the big anchor nuke, is just going to go ahead and basically stun the enemy for like 1.5 seconds. That guaranteeing that it'll land. The second is, he gains a damage dealt bonus. I'm not sure if this is different from like a damage bonus, damage dealt, but he's going to gain up to 60% of it simply from going through his rotation. A 60% damage dealt bonus. That's pretty good. The second part is, casting a mid-air attack or Return from Ashes, well, guys, it's going to increase his crit rate by 30%. He's also going to gain a buff on his outro skill that essentially will deal 880% of his attack. Remember what we looked at for Zani before? Remember how we saw this and we were like, oh, an 80% multiplier increase and 20% crit rate? Bro has 30% crit rate. And then 880% damage from off-field. And remember, this character gets close to around 3.2k. He has, on average, the highest attack on your roster. I think that if you have a built Brant, he has the highest attack in the game. At like a baseline. Like, assuming optimal build. And that's the attack that's going into this multiplier. This 440% that triggers twice. So, this is my take on this, right? It's a little bit broken. And you can kind of see, oh, this is kind of a bit better than what Cantarella had. Because once again, he doesn't really need multiplier bonuses. He doesn't really need like a 245% multiplier bonus when this is the amount of damage that his attack is dealing. And if you play him as a main DPS, guys, you can do this twice in one rotation. Oh, and I also forgot about his attack bonus. It also increases even more after his liberation. Normally, he only gets up to 1560, but he can get up to 2600. So, during certain parts of Brant's rotation, you can just add an additional 1040 attack onto here. So, he regularly hits 4k. He regularly hits 4k at S2. I'm just going to be real over here. I don't think it's as strong as Phrolova's, but this guy's S2 literally makes him probably the best overall unit in the game. That's my take. I think his S2 makes him this like the best overall unit in the game from like a healing, damage, and support perspective. He also buffs with outro skills too, like Cantarella. And the reason why Cantarella is rated a little bit lower is because they basically fill the same role on teams. The healer that does a little bit of DPS, he's just better. Definitely below Phrolova, but I don't think he belongs in A tier. We've seen what those sequence nodes look like relative to the other characters. I think it's a step above all of these ones. Because once again, guys, this is just the best crit rate boost we have out of all the sequence nodes, and an additional 880% emotion value on the character with one of the highest attacks in the game. And again, his first one is literally a CC and a massive damage boost. Oh, and I forgot the last thing. 30% crit rate is a lot. So, essentially, guys, his S2 is also converting him to... I'll show you what my brand stats would look like at S2. He would have 93.9% crit rate, 93.9% crit rate, and 283% damage. Remember when we talked about how Augusta's S2 would have similar stats like that? You're noticing that Brant's S2 basically gets him the same stats as Augusta's S2. But then he has all those additional bonuses as well. So again, you look at all the characters that are in the A tier currently, he's actually above all of them in all these metrics when it comes down to this. Let's move on and take a look at... Oh, dearie me. Oh, dearie me. Not this character. Let's take a look at Phoebe. What about him without his weapon? If you're pulling Brant's S2 and not his weapon, you're probably too dumb to derive any value from the video. While in Absolution, Resonance Liberation increases damage multiplier by 480% instead of 255. So essentially it is like a 225% additional thing. It's not really that much though. You'll see why. And when in Confession, her Liberation is going to increase the damage multiplier by 90% and then inflict the maximum stacks of Spectral Frazzle. So essentially what this is this greatly shortens her rotation time in like Zani teams, which is okay, right? But you don't really like need to because that team should deal enough damage. And then when you're in the Absolution state, the damage multiplier increase looks like a lot, but this is the base damage of Phoebe's Liberation. So this essentially goes from around like 1,200 to maybe like around 1,800, around 1,900. It's not actually that much additional because the baseline damage on it isn't actually that high. And this thing getting an 80% damage multiplier in Confession mode is also very close to no damage. So it's just like her S1 looks a lot better than it actually is. And again, this maximum Spectral Frazzle thing is okay. But like, guys, the ability at a baseline already does 8. And the max stack is 10. So you got 2 more? Which is like, okay, I guess. But that's like not, great. I got 2 more additional Spectral Frazzle stacks. Awesome. It is what it is. It is what it is. All right. A boat drift in tears. When in Absolution, damage dealt by outro skill to targets with Spectral Frazzle on them is amplified by 120%. And when in Confession, Silent Prayer grants 120% more damage amplification for Spectral Frazzle. The unfortunate part about this is that it's okay for her outro skill, but in reality, all this does is it takes the damage multiplier that's already there and adds an additional 120 on top of it. She already gets a 255% in Absolution mode. It's a similar thing to like what's going on with her Liberation. We're just oversaturating the damage multiplier bonuses that are happening over here. And it is, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. But that's what's going on. We're already multiplying it by 255% at a baseline. And the second one is this is already giving 100% spectral frazzle damage amp. And so you're going to go from 100 to, I believe, 220. When you start getting to this point where you have Phoebe's S2, you have Zani with her weapon, all of that, you end up with like 400, 300 something percent spectral frazzle damage amplification. And it's like, it just starts getting to be like a lot. And my personal take is that getting a sequence node for a character that just buffs one other character on the roster doesn't feel that valuable. I personally think that there are better ways that you could spend some of these resources. Because it's just, yes, your one Zani team is going to be stronger, but it's like, couldn't you have just invested in Zani if you wanted to become stronger? Herself. And it would probably do a lot more because that 50% spectral frazzle damage on her S1. It's just, I know she gets 2 different buffs. She gets buffs to both states, and then maybe you're doing it for her absolution mode. But I would dare say that these buffs that she's getting, I mean, now that I think about it, this is spectral, this is amplification. So maybe it interacts really well with the damage multiplier increase. It'll make her outro skill deal a lot of damage. So if you want her to be like a walking nuke when she leaves the field, that's cool. It's just, the supporting side of it, it's a little bit questionable. I would just say, like, overall as a damage increase, the S1 is all right. The S2, though, it is mainly on her outro skill. When it comes to Phoebe's placement on the list, we'll factor in her pretty good overall absolution upgrades. I don't think they're at the level of other units because it only impacts like 2 abilities in her baseline kit. I think we'll put her at the top of B because I think that there are just better ones overall, but maybe we'll put her at bottom of B. Maybe we'll put her in like the right after Iuno, something like that. I think B is a fair spot for her because it is multi-rolled, but it is very specific, even when it is being multi-rolled. Next unit that we have up is, of course, going to be Carlotta. And you all know what I'm probably going to say about this one. Yep, this is the only character that I have sequence nodes on because well, she's already brain dead easy to play, so it's not like I'm really proving anything by by playing her in a normal team anyways. Carlotta's S1 is going to be pretty neat. Basically, she's going to have an increase of about 12.5% crit rate. A sort of small amount, but then she's also going to be able to shorten her rotation by getting more of a Forte circuit. In practice, this does nothing in her hypercarry teams. You actually don't even need this additional substance creation or Forte circuit generation when she's in her main hypercarry teams. This is mainly for when she's in dual DPS, this part over here. However, the crit rate increase is nice. I would say her S1 is like mediocre. At best, it's not really that impressive because in practice, again, it's only a 12.5% crit rate. It is what it is. Now, the second one, though, is pretty crazy. The damage multiplier of Resonance Liberation Fatale Finale increases by 126%. So, this is kind of the situation over here. When Carlotta's Liberation is over here and it deals 644.33, a 126 multiplier is quite nice, right? And the thing is, Carlotta also has built into her kit Defense Ignore. I feel like that's a lot of something people don't recognize. She's got Defense Ignore built into her kit, so that's a nice one as well. And on her Forte circuit, she already has an 80% multiplier increase. And so that 120%, 26% isn't as big as it potentially could look because of the lower baseline multiplier and the built one that's in her kit. However, I do have to say that when you combine the fact that she has 18% defense reduction into the entire mix built into her kit, this sequence node ends up dealing a lot more damage than you might actually think. Yeah, it deals a lot more damage than you might actually think, even though the multiplier doesn't look that high. And when you combine this with a crit rate increase, well, you can go ahead and run critical damage reliably, right? That's in around the 340-something%. So when you factor in the full potential that her S2 lets you reach, I do think it is pretty significant, right? Because I'm going ahead, I'm using this with Shorekeeper, I'm getting the 12.5% crit rate. I can crit for close to like, I think I was critting for close to like 700, 800k on the ability. However, when you looked at all the other sequence nodes that we took a look at, it's fair to say that it's not necessarily at the same level. However, what I will say is, I do think it's probably at like the bottom of A at the most, because once again, right, we're comparing it to all these other ones. I think it's on a similar level to Zani's and Augusta's. Because once again, we talked about how these guys didn't have multiplier increases, but they have like stat boosts instead. She's got a combination of stat boosts and multiplier increases. But do factor this in as well, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about DPS S2s over here. It's not really that important because you're still gonna fucking murder the content. It's about how fast you're murdering the content. Oh, I forgot a unit over here. Sorry, it's just I like to pretend this unit doesn't exist. Okay, let's cover Roccia. S1. It's a piece of shit. This is so trash, it's unbelievable. It basically like shortens her rotation by half a second. However, it does basically lock off an essential part of her kit. Interruption resistance while she's jumping in the air. This character basically doesn't feel like a proper unit at S0 because her interruption resistance is negative and she has to bounce 3 times and she just gets knocked around like crazy. However, when she's at S1, you can just, well, do your 3 bounces and then get the fuck off of her. So yeah, this is the best sequence node she probably has. Feels like it should have been in her baseline kit. I guess it's high value that way, but it does feel like a part of the character is missing. So that's part of why I don't like her. Her S2, well, it's the same exact S2 that Ciaconna and Lupa both have. And you can probably guess, right? She's probably going to go in the same exact spot because of it. However, I will say she's probably at the higher of B tier because of how essential her S1 feels to her kit. And once again, this is going to be based off of the character, not the pull value of the character. Like I said before, if we're basing these S's, these sequence nodes, off of the pull value of the character, Zani would be in D. Because you shouldn't even pull Zani in the first place, because she's actually a bad unit to have on your account. And so again, if we were basing this off of overall pull value, she'd be down here. But we're basing it off how the sequence nodes improve the character. And it's no lie at all to say that Roccia's S1 makes her 30 times more playable, and you're going to reset like 30 times less than her. So that's why she's here. Camellya's first sequence node is just going to give her 28% critical damage, as well as interruption resistance during ephemeral. I don't view interruption resistance during ephemeral as that helpful because it's really easy to not get interrupted during ephemeral. It has like a half-second cast time, and like you actually move on the Y-axis and can dodge attacks with it. So basically, I view the real value of this as 28% critical damage. It's okay. It's not like the craziest thing ever. I'm not going to call it like giga amazing. It's 20% critical damage, but a lot of other crit boosting ones are better than this or comparable. Second one. Damage multiplier of Resonance skill ephemeral is increased by 120%. And so this is where it's going to be really similar to Carlotta. However, ephemeral just deals way more damage at a baseline. We saw 600% for Carlotta before. Ephemeral is at 1262. It's basically a similar sort of like accessibility overall. It's just this nuke is AoE and not tied to the liberation. It probably goes in like the same exact spot as like these 3. I would rate the 4 of these guys pretty comparable. You can like kind of like interchange these. It doesn't really matter too much. And they've always been closely tied together. Shorekeeper. Her S1 makes her playable on mobile. Casting Ephemeral is not a PC exclusive ability. Maybe you actually if you can't cast Ephemeral without getting interrupted, you might. Shorekeeper's S1. It's a quality of life upgrade. There's a reason why I don't even talk about my S1, because you'll notice over here, oh, it increases the range, the duration of the buff, and then lets it persist after using Discernment. But it doesn't matter because after you use Discernment, you're on Shorekeeper, and then you immediately trigger your next Liberation. Basically, it's just, this doesn't boost your damage at all. This doesn't really boost your damage significantly to any degree. It's a sequence node, though, that does, just make her easier to play and lets you do longer rotations and lets you experiment a little bit more, but it functionally does not actually do that much for her. The second one, though, is where it gets a little bit interesting. This causes Shorekeeper's Stellar Realm, which already provides a shit ton of buffs, right? Like crit rate and critical damage, 12.5% crit rate, 25% critical damage. It'll also give you 40% attack to the entire team. And this is kind of like the take. This node over here will basically make all of your teams that scale off of attack deal more damage, right? And the thing is that some characters in this game are going to benefit a lot more from this compared to other ones. I would just say at a baseline, it is strong. However, if you're at the point where you're pulling sequence nodes for a Shorekeeper, this is more so that she can apply her bonuses to a bunch of different teams. However, if you're looking to improve the performance of one team in particular, it's always going to be better to pull nodes of the specific DPS unit. So if you're looking, right, for the most general team buffing that can be used across a bunch of different ways, you want the most widely usable sequence node in the game, I think it's an S+. However, at a raw strength baseline sequence node, I think it's actually, like, if you're trying to improve the DPS of a team specifically, you have two sequence nodes that you can pull. It's probably closer to here, right? If you're only looking to boost one team in the game, because think about it this way, right? All you're really getting is 40% attack if your goal is to only support one team. But if you're looking for the most widely usable one, it's up here. It depends on what your priorities actually are. But on a raw strength level, her S2 is functionally the same, right, as like a Iuno S1. Or like it's very similar to a Ciaconna S1. And this is what I mean by it, right? It'll be super flexible and let you support a bunch of teams, but raw strength-wise, it's not actually that high. Go give it like the value special over here because you could use this S2 on any team in the game, and that alone is a strength of the dupe. That's where we'll land it for now, but I've already given you the specificity of how it can actually be lower. Now let's move on to Xiangli Yao. Yes, we're there, ladies and gentlemen. We're all the way back to version 1.2. Xiangli Yao's S1 is pretty interesting. So basically, after you use this resonance skill Law of Rains, you'll launch out 6 convolution matrices that deal resonance liberation damage that's 8% of the skill damage multiplier. So basically, Law of Rains is this attack over here. And you'll basically deal 6 times 8 or 42% of this. You cast this 3 times in your liberation. This is about like, let me just see over here. That's about 600%, around 630% multiplier. Wait, 3 times 8 times 5. Why are we doing 3 times 8 times 5? Wouldn't it be 8% of like 6? Because again, this is 95.73 times 4 plus 255. That's around like 630%. Yeah, it's around 308% additional motion value during his rotation. Wait, 6 times 0.8 times 6. No, it's around 900%. I feel like I need to see the math now. No, his S1's actually pretty strong. So that's the increase per Law of Rains, right? And then you multiply that by 3, it should be around like 900 something percent extra. Which, for an S1, an additional 900% in your rotation is actually pretty good. It's actually one of the better S1s in the game, if we're frankly being honest. His S2, though, is where stuff gets a little bit interesting. He deals an additional 30% critical damage. It's kind of shit. I think his S1 and S2 were actually swapped. Because his S1 is actually really good, and then his S2 is like, oh, this is Camellya's S1. That's going to be that whole S1, S2 sort of thing. Xiangli Yao's S2 is not that great, but his S1 is actually pretty good. And so the end sort of like conclusion that I'll go with this one is, I think he's a pretty okay. I think he has a good increase on S1, but it's fair to say that sequence nodes have gotten pretty decently power crept over time. They've gotten decently power crept, and I think he belongs at bottom of A tier. I think it is a significant boost over these because, like I said before, multiplier increases are very, very, very significant. And multiplier increases are something that you can't get multiplier increases anywhere else other than a character's kit. They don't got no Sonata sets, right, that say increase the damage multiplier of your liberation. But they do have a bunch of Sonata sets, right, that are like increase your electro damage bonus or your attack bonus and stuff like that. So that's why multiplier damage bonuses are like so... I kind of consider them higher value because they have a much higher ceiling built into their kits. I think A is a decent spot because it is a big boost. Next character we've got ready for ourselves is Changli. I'm just going to preemptively put this in C. Her S2 is so fucking bad, it's unbelievable. She might have the worst actually genuinely the worst S2 in the game. S1, deal 10% more damage on 2 abilities. What even is this thing, bro? I don't think there's a damage difference between S0 and S1 Changli. This is the worst sequence node in the game. It is without a doubt the worst one in the fucking game. I don't even... Guys, it's tripartite flames and flaming sacrifice. So this is the thing. Where the fuck is tripartite flames, bro? Wait, I don't even know where... Oh, here we go. It's a 10% increase on all of these, man. It's 10% increase on all of these. It's a 3% damage increase overall. So, wait, according to Pridewind's calculations, this is a 3% damage increase? That's so dog shit, it's unbelievable. And then her seconds node is just... You gain 25% crit rate. So you get a 3% damage increase, and then you get more crit rate. Are you guys beginning to see why this is the worst one in the game? I'm not even... Wait a second. No, it belongs in D. It belongs in D. No, Cantarella being done dirty. This is shit. It's so bad, it's unbelievable. If any character deserves a rework to their sequence nodes, it's this unit. Wait. Let's see. Sorry. I've spread misinformation. Guys, it's not a 3% damage increase. It's a 2.5%. I spread misinfo. It's only a 2.5%. It's not 3. That gotta be the worst S1 in existence, bro. Like, good God, this is trash. And this one's not that much better. Because all this does is it just lets her use a crit damage forecast. Great. Awesome. That's where she's gonna go. Hopefully that you don't need any more explanation. Hopefully you've seen why every other character in the game has better sequence nodes than her. I even think Shorekeeper's, like, at just her 40% attack is better than Changli's entire thing. Oh, I forgot G-Jaw. Casting Resonance skill is going to give you 10% crit rate and 15 Resonance energy. This one's actually pretty decent because it lets you at least skip an ER roll on your build, but getting 130 ER on Zezhi isn't even hard anyways. So it's like, and 10% crit rate is just like, you couldn't give her more? It's whatever. It's okay. You get a substat. Basically, her S1 is you can skip 2 substats on her build. Congratulations. You got Zezhi's S1. You spent all that shit for it, and you get to skip 1 ER roll, and you get to skip 1 crit roll. Awesome. Great. That's all this is. The second one is going to increase the max number of Inklet spirits summoned by her liberation by 6. So her S2 is 600% additional motion value. Or sorry. Let me correct that. 390% additional motion value. This is dog shit. I think Changli's definitely at the bottom, but this is like, it's slightly above it. Let's move on and take a look at Jinhsi's. All right, so we're going to have a similar situation over here. We've already done a bit of a spoiler, right? Jinhsi's S1 is really good. So essentially, it gives her an 80% damage bonus on the biggest nuke in her kit. And so Jinhsi's S1 can oftentimes just be enough to absolutely destroy all the content in the game. And then her S2 is a pile of dog shit. Yeah, this might be actually the worst S2 in the game. And the reason why is because when you're taking this into any content like endgame, this does nothing. Because the right way of playing Jinhsi is you actually start off the rotation. It's like you get to skip like an opening rotation at the start of the battle to like generate your forte and your outro skill and stuff like that. And it's just like, this is like an S2 that's just overworld. If you're thinking about using this S2 in like the end game content where it matters, I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't really do that much because it saves you about 5 seconds at the start of a run. It's nice though if you're farming overworld. I guess that's value on its own, but her S1 is strong enough, I think, to put her at the top of B. Top of B if you don't care about overworld farming. Bottom of A if overworld farming is a factor for you. Honestly, she might be higher up in A if overworld farming is a factor for you. Now we got Yinlin. Oh, dearie me. S1. Resident skill, magnetic roar and lightning damage deals 70% more damage. Lightning execution. Y'all ready to see how with the motion value on these abilities? Whoa, 75% more damage. Huge. 150% motion value. And then 320%. This is not real. It's not real. Second one, improves her rotation time. Resident skill, Electromagnetic Blast, recovers an additional 5 judgment points, which is her forte circuit, and 5 resonance energy. I'm gonna rate Yinlin's above Changli's because at least Yinlin's allows her to have a shortened rotation time. Changli's S2 literally is gain 40% crit damage, and that's her entire first 2 sequence nodes. That's Changli. At least she rotates faster, so it's like it can have like a meaningful impact on her gameplay. It's a competition between these two at the bottom, though. One thing for certain is that Wuthering Waves' old units, they got some dog shit sequence nodes. Now we're ready for the real highlight of the show, ladies and gentlemen. It's Jiyan. Resonant skill Wind Queller can be used one more time, and when casting Resonant skill Wind Queller, the resolve cost is decreased by 50%. This would be an okay sequence node if one thing about Jiyan's kit was changed. If Wind Queller dealt heavy attack damage. Unfortunately, what ends up resulting is that Jiyan's Wind Queller having extra charges functionally is useless because using it is a DPS loss. Because Ching Long, Emerald Storm, all of this, it deals more damage than his skill. And so, if you actually use his sequence node, right, his S1 to its max potential, you're using that shit on cooldown because, like, it's a sequence node, I gotta use it, your DPS goes down. Yeah, if you're making full use of Jiyan's S1, your DPS goes down. So, this could be one of the only sequence nodes in the game that literally, if you don't use it properly, your DPS goes down. That's impressive that he has one like this. His S2 is a 28% attack boost. I'm gonna be honest. It's not that bad. Obviously, it's dog shit when you look at every other S2 in the game. It's worse than S1s that give 40% attack and 35% attack. It's pretty awful. But I will factor in one thing. His S2 is at least a stepping stone to his S3. And Jiyan's S3 is like 2 sequence nodes combined. We can agree that Jiyan's S3 is like 2 sequence nodes combined. He gains 16% crit rate and 32% critical damage. If we were to do an S3 tier list, Jiyan would be decently high. 28% attack, 16% crit rate, and 32% critical damage is kind of a lot. That's a lot of raw stats. And so, I'll factor in that he has a nice stepping stone to S3. Not a lot of people have it. And I'll put him at either the top of D or the bottom of C. Because guess what, guys? Look at all the people below Jiyan. Ooh, great. A 45% attack damage bonus on Zezhi at the end of Zezhi's rotation. It's decent. Not as good as Jiyan's. Yinlin's S3. Hey, guys. A 55% damage multiplier increase on an ability that... Oh, great. Oh, awesome. My coordinated attacks are going to deal 100% damage instead of 78. And then who else? What is it? Changli? What's Changli's S3? Oh, wow. An 80% damage increase on my Resonance Liberation. If there was a damage multiplier increase, you'd have an argument over here. But an 80% damage increase is not that good. I'm not even joking with you right now. Only an 80% damage increase isn't that good. If it was a damage multiplier increase, I'd see what you're talking about. But when this is stacking with every other damage increase that you have in your kit, like the 60% you're going to be getting from your echoes, as well as diluted by any resonance liberation damage rolls you have, this is actually kind of dog shit. Especially when it only works on one ability in her kit. If we were to look at it from a stepping stone to S3 angle, Jiyan's is literally, his S3 is like genuinely way better than all of these. Probably combined if we're frankly being real. That's why he's going to be rated higher. And that's the only reason. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be our updated S2 tier list for Wuthering Waves version 2.6. And of course, right, we can always update this even more into the future as it goes on. But if I'm waiting for every single update, then naturally, right, I might just end up waiting for a long time. And people could be asking, oh, Saint, why aren't you looking at the S3s for other units? We're only looking at S3s for units that have some dog shit S2s and dog shit S1s. Because the goal of this, right, is to factor in the value of what you can get from the Coral Shop. And you can't get S3 from the Coral Shop. It's not possible. However, if the characters do have genuinely just awful S2s and awful S1s, then I will factor in the impact of their S3s. However, there are only 4 1.x units that, in my opinion, fall into that bucket. And so that's why we took a look at their S3s. That'll be that for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I know that this was a pretty fun, wild ride, but I will say that the overall results are pretty comparable to what we've had before when it comes to the game. But there's one clear winner over here, and that's going to be Phrolova, just absolutely leading the pack when it comes to overall return on investment when it comes to those corals. Her scaling is, without a doubt, almost unethical with what's going on. And so, yeah, she will actually be the queen of S2s for a long time coming, because I don't think she's actually really balanced at all. Let me know what you all thought, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.